A very warm welcome to today's expert webinar on pivoting in Excel. I am Ankita from SpringPeople. We are India's largest enterprise training provider. I will be a moderator for today's session. We are thrilled to have you with us for this exciting session. Today we are going to explore how you can make pivoting in Excel. But before we get started, let me introduce you to our esteemed speaker, Mrs. Pallavi Prasad. We are honored to have Mrs. Pallavi Prasad, an accomplished corporate trainer dedicated to bridging the gap between technology and business. Pallavi brings a wealth of experience, having conducted 500 plus successful training sessions. She has earned acclaim as a trusted expert in her domain. Her ability to simplify technical concepts ensures you leave with practical takeaways. She is committed to helping professionals like you master skills that make a real impact in the workplace. Pallavi Prasad's unwavering commitment to delivering timely and impactful training consistently adds value to organizations, ensuring participants are adept at applying their knowledge in real world scenarios. Join us for this insightful webinar to learn how to make efficient HTTP requests, how to make pivoting in Excel. And now participants, if you have any questions, please do share them in the chat box. They will be answered at the end of the session. Without further ado, let's start today's session. Over to you, Mrs. Pallavi.
Thank you, Ankita. Welcome, everybody. This is a quick, short webinar on pivoting in Excel. I'm sure many of you have heard of what a pivot table is and probably worked on it as well. So this is more of just understanding a little bit more about pivots and maybe have a look at some of the new, or should I say, more useful features that we can include with pivots. So let us start. This is the agenda for the day. So we are going to have a look at how a pivot table can, what are the components of a pivot table. We'll have a look at what a pivot table is, creating a pivot table, what are the benefits, and we'll have a look at some extra things that we can add to a pivot table. Now let us start with what a pivot table is. Well, one of the most powerful features that Excel provides us is what is known as a pivot table. Now, this allows you to summarize data, it allows you to analyze and to visualize large sets of data in a tabular format, and it's quite easy to work with and manipulate basically. So you can give different viewpoints of the data based on how you would like to work with it. That in essence is what a pivot table is. It is very easy to build, as easy to edit, and very, very interactive. It gives you summary of, it helps you to summarize your data in a very comfortable and very easy manner. To create a pivot table is also pretty simple. But before we create a pivot table, let's have a look at what are the components of a pivot table. So whenever you want to create a pivot table, the first thing that you need to create the table is the data source. So where is the data coming from? Which is the range of fields that the data is coming from? That is something that we have to have a look at. One of the things that we have to remember is that this data is organized in a very clear manner. By organized, what I mean is that the data has to have proper column headings. Sorting, all of that is immaterial, but the data should have proper column headings. It should be arranged neatly in columns in a tabular manner. You can't have any data that you like and then try to convert it to a pivot. That's not how it works, because a pivot table actually looks for the column headings when you try to generate the pivot table and the content within the pivot table. The second thing is the field list. The field list is when you create a pivot table, you have a list of fields that appear towards the right of the pivot table. Now, all the fields that are there or all the column headings that are there in your data set that you have earlier selected, those will be there. Now, what you need is to drag and drop what you want in whichever order you want to give your viewpoint to the table, basically to show the report. Next is your rows and columns. You can arrange your data in particular rows and columns to specify how you want your data to be shown. Your selections and your determining your idea on how you want to put the rows and the columns determines how the data is going to be organized and displayed. Now coming to the next one, you have also got values. Now values are what are going to be the numerical data that you would like to summarize or you would like to analyze or count or whatever. So that is the values part of your pivot table. Lastly, you have filters. Filters are used to filter the results that are there within your pivot table. We will be creating a pivot table later on now. But for now, let us just have a look at how we can create a pivot table. This is a quick screenshot of how a pivot table will look. So you will notice that this is your field list. Here's the list of fields. You drag and drop the data from the fields into your rows, columns, and values and your filters. So there are 4 sections that are available to you. Your pivot table sets where you can specify where you want which field to go and work with. Now to create a pivot table. So how do you create a pivot table? To create a pivot table is pretty easy. The first thing that you need happens to be your data set that you want to analyze. So let's do this practically. Let me switch over into Excel. So I have a data set here. Now this data set is a very old one, but it is, and it's not a very huge one. It has about 104 rows, 103 to 104 rows. So if you notice, this particular data set happens to be very clearly defined with 3 column headings. So there are about 100 rows. Starts from 4. So it has about 100 rows. Now the first step to creating a pivot table is you're going to place your cursor inside anywhere in your data set, anywhere. Doesn't have to be in a particular column. It can be anywhere. Then you get into insert and you want to be able to insert a pivot table. So what we are going to do is you will see you have pivot charts here. Now you will also find a pivot table also here. There is something called as recommended pivot tables that are available to us. So if here the data that I have is pretty common and it is pretty simple. If you have much more complex data, you can use the recommended pivot tables. For me, a regular pivot table is going to do the job. So I'm going to click on pivot table. The first thing that you will need get is this particular window where it is going to select the range automatically. The reason it selects the range automatically is because of where you have put your cursor. So if you place your cursor inside your data set, the selection will be automatic. It will take the headings as well. Then where you want to create the pivot table, it's usually preferred that you create a pivot table in a separate worksheet and not within the same sheet in which your data is. That is always preferable. Okay, then comes to the click on OK and your pivot table is ready. Now this is the old way of working with the pivot table. This is the newer pivot table that we have. So now there are, you can go back to the older way of pivot table where you drag and drop everything onto the pivot table. That is also possible for you if you want to go to the settings and you want to set it up. You can do that. You go to go to file, go to options, and here you have available in advanced, I think you have something to do with pivot tables here, I guess. It is somewhere in this list. So what you are going to have to do is you're going to have to set up the content in this particular location. I'm not Yeah, so this is where you have edit default layout. It will ask you where you want to edit the default layout, how you want to work with it. All of it is available to you here. All you have to do is select the version that you want to work with, and you can work with a earlier version of pivot tables also. For now, what I want is to create a pivot table. The easiest way to create a pivot table is dragging and dropping it into these 4 sections that are there. If you remember, we spoke about the components of a pivot table just recently, and of those 5 components, all the 5 are available to you on this particular screen. The pivot table fields that you see, these are the 4 fields that I have. As I told you, the data set that I'm using is pretty small, so it's not a big deal. So it just selects these 4, one of these 4, drag it and drop it. So let us say that I want to have quarter sales. Okay, so first, what is the scenario that you want to work with? Keeping that in mind, you're going to have to work with it. So I want to have the total sales for every product for the quarter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put quarter here in columns. Then I'm going to put sales as values, and I'm going to put product in the rows. So here you will notice that for every quarter, I have for any seeds, what's the sales, basil leaves, what the sales, so on and so forth. So this is one way in which you can work with. Now, another thing here is it says column labels and row labels. You can specify, I want to look at only the 4th quarter, means you just have to uncheck everything and click on OK. It will show you the 4th quarter only. So the grand total will also change based on the viewpoint that you want to work with. Now, what I want is yearly sales. So I'm going to put year, let us say, in the filter. So it shows all years. Let us say I want to see for only 2003. Click on OK. This is only for 2003 quarter 4. So like this, you can apply your filters on all of them. So let's click on OK. This is only for 2003. You want for a different year, let us say 2006 only. Select 2006 and you will see that the dates change. You can apply the filter. Now, one more thing that we have to remember when we work with the pivot tables is that when you're working with a pivot, it is not a rule that all the content that is there, everything, all the fields that are there in a pivot should mandatorily, in your data set should mandatorily go into a pivot. There is no rule of that kind at all. What data you place into a data set, from your data set, what fields that you're going to work with, only those will go into the pivot table. You can refrain from adding everything else. Now, as I said, the data table that I'm using is pretty small. What if I had a larger set? Give me a minute. Yeah. What if I had a set like this? Now, as you can see, this set is big. I have a lot of fields. So what if I had a set like this? So much of information. How do I work with it? Now let us have a look at how I can work with this kind of a set. So I'm going to insert a pivot table. Now this is a larger pivot table. So if you want to, you can use one of the recommended pivot tables that are there. It shows you how it is. See, you can choose the kind of pivot table that you want. It will show you the data that you want to work with. Okay, or you can always go back and select your own, work with your own pivot table in this particular manner, where you can drag and drop how you want to work with. So what I want is, I want total sales here, let us say in values. Okay, then I want, let us say, state and city. Okay, now what else do I want in the columns? Let us say I'm going to put the vertical in the columns. So you have your data here. So this is basically how you want to analyze it. Now, great. Every time when I'm analyzing it, I don't want to be using an external filter. I want to use a filter that is much more easier to work with. So what you can do is you can add what we call as a slicer. So let's quickly go back to the slides. This is what I have shown you, and that is what is on the slides. So when you have created your pivot table, once you have created your pivot table, the view that is there in the pivot table, the visual that you show in the pivot table is going to be completely based on what you would like to report to your audience. Basically, what is it that you want to show your audience? Now that is what is going to be there in your pivot table. Just because you have 100 columns does not mean that all the 100 columns should mandatorily be placed onto the pivot. That's not how it works. It is mainly based on how many looks you have, or how many what is the kind of report that you want to present. So what are the benefits of working with the pivot table? Whenever you work with a pivot table, the benefits of it are any kind of complex data that you might have. It allows you to analyze the data in a very quick and easy manner. The reports are dynamic. Why we say it is dynamic is because any changes that is made to the data set, if you come back and refresh your pivot table, the new data is automatically going to be updated. I am not talking about adding new rows or adding new columns, because that kind of data does not get updated until and unless you reselect the data set. Instead, what we are talking about, or what kind of dynamic reporting I'm talking about, is in my data set, let us say that I have made some changes and the values have changed within the data set range. Then refreshing your pivot table means that you will see that very same data in your pivot tables. Excellent visual representation. You can play around with your pivot table. You can make it look good. So if you go back and have a look at the pivot table that I have created, you don't like the way this looks, you can always go back and redesign your pivot table based on how you want to work with it. Now, how do you want your blank rows to be shown? How do you want to work with it? What are the grand totals that you want to have, not have? Subtotals if you want or don't. You want banded rows, you want banded columns. You have so many designs that are available. You can clear whatever styling that you have already applied. Each of them comes with its own style set. Now there is interactive filtering. I already showed you that when you have a filter available, a report filter available, you can filter your entire pivot table. It is not necessary that there should be only one filter. You can have multiple filters provided they are interconnected. You have data models that are already available to you. You can work with data models so that you can present a much more comprehensive and visually appealing report to your viewers. You can also have what we call as time-based analysis as well. So you want to be able to, like in this particular case that we have, for a particular period of time, for a particular year, I want to see the sales. So automatically I can work with this kind of time-based analysis. Now, what else can we do with the pivot table, and how else can we work with it? So before I continue, I would like to just inform all of you in the audience that one of my closest friends' mother passed away earlier today. So I will be winding up the webinar a little early as I need to go and be with her. So I really apologize for this particular unforeseen circumstance that I am currently facing. So thank you for your understanding, everyone. Now, some of the tips and tricks that I have put up here, there are a lot of them. I have mentioned a few of them only. One of them is adding a slicer. Now, what happens usually is that you don't want to be able to go to the report filter and make a change. You would rather make a change through one of the other columns. Let's take a small example here. Now I'm going to place my cursor inside this, go to pivot table analyze, and I'm going to insert a slicer. Now when you click on inserting a slicer, you will notice that all the various fields that are there in this particular data set have turned up in my slicer. Now it doesn't have to be on a filter, and it doesn't have to be that I'm working with a particular thing only. So let us say that I want to filter based on walk-ins. So I'm selecting a walk-ins filter. Then I want to slicer for zone. I can have multiple slicers. I also want a slicer for region. I have state and city already and vertical. So let us say I want it for outlet name and for classification. Let us click on OK. So you can see for yourself, I've created this many filters. You can change the way your filter looks. You can make it much more convenient to work with. Now, let us take this. Let us say I want to look at only South. You can see automatically everything else has automatically filtered. Now let us say that I don't want this particular filter. I want to look at only Mumbai. There you have it. Mumbai, I don't have anything for everything else. This is the number of walk-ins that I have for Mumbai. So like this, I can filter it in a single click. I can make my pivot table show me the data that I want based on something that I'm seeing. For example, let us say Core Spencer's. Here it is in Bangalore, Core Spencer's. This is the walk-in. It is a grocery location. This is in South Bangalore, South 1, and it is zone is South. So I have so much of information that I'm getting with a single click. Now this is what a slicer does for you. You don't need to have 10 different slicers. You can have the number of slicers that you prefer. It can be one, it can be two. Your choice on how many slicers you want to add to your pivot table to show the data that you want. Now, this very same pivot table, you can come back and change it by just dragging and dropping the content or just removing it like this. So let us say I want to have a look at total bill cuts in the values. Okay. Now, what else do I want? I want classification to be there in my columns. I can come back and change the slicer too. I can just delete it. Gone. Okay. So I have classifications. Now in my rows, I want outlet ID. I have the details. Now there is a bit of a problem here. One thing you will notice is everything is blank. So I want to be able to show zeros instead of blank, because having something blank doesn't look very nice. So how do I set it up to show zeros when there is no value there? Let us check if we can do it. So how am I going to set it up? What is it that I'm going to give? So you have options available to you. You can go to options and you can work with it. Now here, totals and filters, display, everything is available here. You can play around with it, the layouting, the formatting, everything you can work around with this. Another thing is you also have field settings, which allow you to summarize and show the values. So it says show values as no calculations. You want to be able to show it as a percentage of the grand total. You can get it to work in any which way you want. You can also change the number format as to how you want. Do you want to print it as currency? Do you want to print it as percentage? You can play around with it and print it the way you want it to. So you can basically format it in any which way you want. This is the basic idea behind how you work with a pivot table. You can also handle providing it with various functionalities as well. There are a few more things. One of the things that we have is what we call as a calculated field. So this is something new that was introduced into a pivot table that helps you to work with a pivot table. So what is a calculated field and how do you work with it? You can add a calculated field. It's one of the tips that you can add when you work with a calculated field in a pivot table. So this basically is a new field that will perform calculations for you using whatever fields you already have in the pivot table. Now, whatever is the data you want, let us say if I want to calculate the total amount paid for a particular zone in a particular area, then I can do all of that by using this calculated field. Adding calculated fields is pretty simple and pretty easy when you want to work with all of this. Okay, so adding a calculated field is you go to some to fields, items and sets, click on calculated field, select the name of the field. Then you put in your formula. So let us say I want to show a sum of all the walk-ins, let us assume. Then all you have to do is say amount of walk-ins and put in a formula. Just giving you an example. So whatever formula you put in, you can use any of the Excel formulae that you have as well. You can insert any Excel formula that you have as well. So just have to type it in. So let us say I have a sum of some fields. So I just give the field names or count the number of fields that I have. Okay, so I can write my formula here. Once I add my formula and I have inserted my fields, so let us say equal to sum. So you will notice here, sum of field 1, I have not given a name to it. Yeah, let's say count of days worked. So you have the values here. You can see it for yourself. Sum of total bill cuts, count of days worked. You can say sum of days worked. You can count. So you can change the summarization values that you want. See, you can play around with it the way you want, how you want to work with it. So this is a calculated field. Now the same way, if you want to remove a calculated field, go back to the same location, go back to calculated field, and you are going to select the calculated field from here. Just say delete. It will delete it, click on OK, and it's gone. So you can see what all you can do when you work with these very specific calculated fields and how you can add them, remove them, how to add a slicer. So there are so many things that you can do when you're working with a pivot. So here, this is a small example of what I did as well. Another thing that you can add is you can add what is known as a timeline. So when you're working with the timeline, what it is basically it will show you something that is time related. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the previous example that I worked with. If you remember, this one. Here everything is time based. So I'm going to remove this. Okay. And I'm going to add a timeline. So how do you add a timeline is put your cursor anywhere inside your pivot table, go to pivot table analyze and select insert a timeline. So there is no field formatted as a date. So you can't insert a timeline when you don't have a field formatted as a date. Now let us see. It's looking at sum of years, sorry. Let's put this into the, let's try again. See, I don't have a field which has a date. So if I don't have a field which has a date, it cannot show me a timeline. But in case it did have a something which had a timeline, then it would look, you would get a small, what do you call, a small timeline in the bottom of your pivot table where it would show you the values based on the timeline that you have available to you. So that is in essence how it works. Another thing that you can do is you can customize your sorting. Basically, you can specify how you want to sort. You can create a custom list, and based on that, you can sort the content that is there in your pivot table. That is another thing that you can do. You can also add and remove a calculated field, as I've already shown you. Some more things that you can do is you can calculate the difference between two columns. See, whenever you work with a pivot table, one of the formulas that it uses is the get pivot table data formula. You can disable that formula. You can show the grand totals. You can show percentages. You can change the currencies. You can add a report filter. You can restore your source data. You can delete your source data. You can make it even more, you can delete, you can drill down into your pivot table. You can look at content in a much more specific manner. You can substitute the blank cells that are there within a pivot table. Then you don't want to display your blank data, you can show zeros or null or NA or something within your pivot table, you can do all of that where pivot tables are concerned. Now, pivot tables are just what we have seen in this webinar. It is just the tip of the iceberg, basically. There is so much of analysis that you can do when you work with a pivot table. When you combine a pivot table with VBA or with macros and write some more code in the backend, you will be able to see that the pivot tables can perform amazing analysis for you on various kinds of complex data that we have. So they are ultimate. When you work with pivot tables, you can also create a pivot chart for this particular pivot table. So you can create a clustered chart, a line chart, a pie chart, area chart, you name it. So I'm going to create a simple column chart and click on OK. And there you have the column chart based on this. Do remember, they are both interconnected. So any changes that you make here, so let us say I remove product, add quarter here and move product here, the chart changes. So it will change based on what you have, what you are doing. Okay, so you want an year, you can add an year, you will find that it will add a here as well. By the way, as they are interconnected, changes made to the chart will reflect in the table and vice versa as well. So any questions or doubts that you might have, please feel free to ask. I will provide you with the necessary answers. Over to you, Ankita.
Um, Thank you so much, Pallavi, for such an engaging and insightful session. I'm sure everyone here has picked up strategies and techniques they can apply immediately. If you guys are interested in learning more about various advanced Excel training, do check out our discounted batches of virtual instructor-led trainings on our website, springpeople.com. These VILT trainings are leveraged online from the comforts of your home and flexible as per your schedule and location. If you do not find any suitable batches, we'd be happy to discuss and schedule private batches for you. If you don't have time to join live online, then do try out our affordable self-paced courses. For more information, do write to us at training@springpeople.com or call on our number displayed on the current slide. Now, we will open the forum to answer questions if there is any. So, over to you, Pallavi.
Thank you, Ankita. So anybody has any questions, please clarify.
Okay, I guess there is no questions. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. We shall be sending out the webinar recording to all of you participants soon. I request you to kindly provide feedback before signing off, which will really help us improve the quality of our future events. Thanks again for joining us today. Signing off on behalf of Team Spring People. Hope to see you again for our next expert webinar. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.